Hello everyone, Nostril here, coming at you with kind of a different video than what I normally do. This is not going to necessarily be covering any particular games or whatnot, but the topic is still related to gaming. This is going to cover an event that happened not too long ago, and I thought I would give my thoughts on it because it kind of ties in with another topic that I've been kind of thinking about making a video about anyway. So if you like this, maybe just go ahead and let me know in the comments. And depending on the feedback, I might do more of these in the future. I don't know. Maybe I could give it a name like Nostril Soapbox or something like that. So, for those who may not be aware, the website Vimm's Lair, which is one of the oldest surviving ROM sites on the internet, posted a little over a week ago that they were essentially pressured by Nintendo, Sega, Lego, and the ESA to remove many of the games from their website. Now, this is of course far from the first ROM site to be taken down via threat of legal action by the gaming industry. Nintendo, in particular, has a long history, a long trail of corpses of various ROM sites left in its wake of threatening legal action. But there's something about them going after Vimm's Lair in particular that really stings for me. The first off being, of course, that Vimm's Lair has been around for so long. Honestly, a part of me is surprised that they were able to go for as long as they did without running afoul of these sort of things. But yeah, I guess maybe a part of me had always kind of held out hope that they would be low profile enough that they would evade notice, but I guess that may have been a foolish hope. And that brings me to the aforementioned topic that I was thinking of making a video about anyway, Nintendo. Now, I have a long and, let's say, complicated history with Nintendo. Um, they were my main source of playing console games, at least, growing up. I didn't really own one myself until I got a Nintendo 64, but I was able to play the older consoles at the next door neighbor's kid's house, who I was friends with at the time. And I dearly love many of those old Nintendo games, obviously, since I have many formative childhood memories associated with them. Yet, despite my aforementioned love for these games, you will never see footage of an official Nintendo game on this channel, ever. And the reason for that is simple. Nintendo is way too overprotective of its intellectual property, and I am not going to step foot in that minefield if I can help it. A personal analogy of mine is that Nintendo is essentially the Walt Disney Company of the video game industry, known for their bright and cheery games that often are meant for all ages, that are often just have a really fun, charming feel to them, but at the same time, they have some sordid business practices and a legal department that'll scare the pants off of just about anyone. Heck, they're even borrowing from the infamous Disney Vault concept back in the day when Disney would release physical copies of their films back in the 80s and 90s for only a short span of time. And Nintendo is creating this the same artificial scarcity with their limited runs of games like the Super Mario 3D All-Stars game. Most importantly, for the continued survival of this channel, Nintendo is notorious for issuing DMCA takedowns, copyright claims, channel strikes, and other such punitive actions against YouTube channels that dared show footage or even uploading soundtracks to Nintendo games, despite being no way of listening to the soundtracks on their own. And that's just something I don't want to deal with. Not to mention how in the past they have also tried implementing arbitrary policies and restrictions that channels had to follow. There have been instances where they've retracted those restrictions only to come back years later with new ones. It's just too much of a hassle. It's a real shame too, because I would like to upload videos about Nintendo games if I thought that I could safely do so, but YouTube is volatile enough of a platform as is without me having to worry about the house that Mario built looking over my shoulder constantly. Getting back to the Vimm's Lair situation, though, it is worth pointing out that Nintendo is not the only culprit in this. That's not to say that I necessarily trusted the other corporations and organizations. Sega, while not being as draconian as Nintendo historically, are no strangers to taking actions like issuing cease and desist notice for fan projects, such as the Streets of Rage remake back in the day. And the Entertainment Software Association has famously lobbied against efforts towards video game preservation, including just a few months ago rejecting an offer by the Library of Congress here in the US, saying that it should be up to the publisher's discretion instead. Now, I guess the wild card in this was Lego. Wasn't expecting them to weigh in on this, but I guess they've gotten really protective maybe about their video game adaptations. The sad truth is this: the gaming industry not only has no interest in games preservation, but at this point it is actively working to sabotage efforts towards that end. The reason being is simple. They've got quite the racket going on nowadays, and they would like players, rather than to pay once for a more traditional video game and leave it at that, they want you to buy their new games, most of which are laden with microtransactions, loot boxes, season passes, so called live service games, and other anti consumer predatory practices that nickel and dime players to death. And that's not even mentioning how so many modern so called AAA games, even ones that are single player focused, have some sort of always online requirement, usually operating from central servers on the publisher's end, meaning that once the game stops being profitable and the publisher decides to pull the plug on said service, you can't play those games anymore, even the single player portions. I'm also willing to bet that modern so called AAA publishers might be secretly afraid that players might end up holding them to higher standards if they were able to easily and legally access older games and realize just how good some of those old games were. And yes, I know that console manufacturers offer paid subscription services that allow you access to older games in their back catalog, but with the exception of Nintendo Switch Online, good luck finding any game that's over 25 years old. And let's be real here, all of the games being offered on these services are all cherry-picked from the most popular and or culturally relevant games, while thousands of other quality games that didn't quite reach those thresholds are left by the wayside. Can I play Super Strike Eagle or Space Station Silicon Valley on Nintendo Switch's online service? Didn't think so. These services will all be phased out as well, especially when the consoles get old, new ones take their place, and the user base gets fewer and fewer, which means that if you're going to stick to that approach, eventually you're going to have to run out and buy a whole other console just to keep playing. And of course, collecting physical copies of retro games and hardware isn't a silver bullet solution either. Not that there's anything wrong with that hobby, it's just that eventually, given enough time, hardware breaks down, games start to break down, whether it's dirty cartridges, disk rot, mechanisms breaking down, fewer and fewer spare parts, fewer and fewer support from third party retro game manufacturers as they get older and older. You can't escape the inevitable march of time when it comes to these sort of things. Not to mention, too, how there is a disgusting speculator market that's cropped up in recent years that has driven the price up for certain games and consoles to ridiculous degrees, making it an unfeasible option for most people financially. Now, look, I'm not trying to be all doom and gloom here. I do believe that, regardless of what's thrown at it, game preservation will endure in one form or another moving forward. However, it is always unfortunate when an outlet like Vimm's Lair is essentially stripped of most of its functionality. I know that the website still exists, but let's be honest, without most of its game library from the major console mover and shakers back in the day, it is essentially a shell of its former self. Anyway, the day is progressing, it's getting hot in this room, and I'm starting to sweat in this recording chair. So I'll just leave you folks with this. Pour out one for Vimm's Lair if you haven't already. It had a terrific run while it lasted.